The night I met the girl who changed my life, the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and neon as I walked down the rain-slicked streets of downtown Chicago. It was one of those late October nights where the wind carried the promise of winter, sharp and unforgiving. At 28, I was stuck in a loop I couldn't escape. By day, I crunched numbers at a mid-tier accounting firm, staring at spreadsheets until my eyes burned. By night, I returned to my cramped apartment, ordered takeout, and scrolled through other people's highlight reels on my phone. Life felt like a muted documentary, predictable, safe, and utterly lonely dot. My friends had tried setting me up before. "You need to get out more, Alex," they'd say. But blind dates ended in awkward silences, and bars made me feel like an observer rather than a participant. That night, though, my coworker Jake had dragged me to an art gallery opening. "It's free wine and pretty pictures," he'd insisted. "What could go wrong?" The gallery was tucked into a converted warehouse in the West Loop, all exposed brick and industrial beams. Jazz music floated through the space, mingling with the low hum of conversations. I clutched a plastic cup of cheap Merlot and wandered past abstract canvases that looked like someone had spilled paint in a fit of rage. Jake had already disappeared into a crowd of people who actually knew what they were talking about. I stopped in front of a large piece titled Echoes. It was a swirling mix of deep blues and silvers, with faint silhouettes that seemed to reach out from the chaos. It reminded me of how I felt most days lost in the noise. "Beautiful, isn't it?" A voice said beside me. I turned, and there she was. She had dark, wavy hair that fell just past her shoulders, a few strands escaping to frame her face. Her eyes were a striking hazel, catching the gallery lights like they held secrets. She wore a simple black dress with a denim jacket thrown over it, red sneakers peeking out, an effortless mix of elegance and rebellion. A small silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon rested against her collarbone. "Yeah," I managed, my throat suddenly dry. "It feels alive." She smiled, and something in my chest shifted. That's exactly what the artist was going for. Most people see the mess. I see the movement. We stood there for a moment, the world narrowing to just the painting and her voice. Her name was Elena. She worked as a freelance photographer, capturing moments in the city that most people walked past without noticing. She told me she'd grown up in a small town in Michigan, drawn to Chicago by the energy, the stories waiting to be told. Through her lens, I don't know why I opened up. Maybe it was the wine or the way she listened like my words actually mattered. I told her about the spreadsheets, the quiet apartment, the way time seemed to slip by without leaving a mark. She didn't offer empty platitudes. Instead, she tilted her head and said, "Sometimes the best stories start when you stop waiting for them." We left the gallery together after Jake texted that he was heading to another party. The rain had eased into a soft drizzle. Elena pulled out a small umbrella from her bag bright, yellow, comically cheerful against the gray night, and held it over both of us as we walked toward the river dot. Our conversation flowed like the water beside us. She asked about my dreams, the ones I buried under practicality. I admitted I used to write short stories in college, little tales of ordinary people finding extraordinary courage. "Why'd you stop?" she asked, her sneakers splashing through a puddle. "Life," I shrugged. "Bills. Fear of failing at something that mattered." Elena stopped under a street lamp, the light casting a warm halo around her. "Fear is just the echo of a life unlived, Alex. What if tonight is the start of something new?" We ended up at a tiny all-night diner a few blocks away. The place smelled of coffee and bacon. Over greasy fries and bottomless mugs, she showed me photos on her camera raw, unfiltered shots of street. Musicians, foggy mornings on Lake Michigan, a child laughing in the rain. Each image told a story of resilience, of beauty in the overlooked. I shared one of my old stories on my phone, a clumsy piece about a man who found his purpose in a single conversation. She read it quietly, then looked up with tears glistening in her eyes. This is beautiful. You see people, Alex, don't hide. That, by 2 a.m., the city had quieted. We walked back toward the L train, shoulders brushing. Neither of us wanted the night to end. At the station, she turned to me, the yellow umbrella now closed and dripping at her side. I don't do this, she said softly. Meet strangers and feel like I've known them forever. But tonight, it feels different. I nodded, heart hammering. Me, neither. We exchanged numbers. As her train pulled away, she waved through the window, that crescent moon pendant catching the light one last time. I stood on the platform long after it disappeared, the rain starting again, but I didn't feel cold. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Elena texted me photos from her shoots, a sunrise over the skyline, a stray cat, curled on a fire escape. I started writing again, small paragraphs at first, then full scenes. She dragged me to hidden bookstores and rooftop concerts. One night we danced in the kitchen of her tiny studio apartment while old records played, flour dusting the floor from a failed attempt at baking cookies. She saw the version of me I'd forgotten, the one who dreamed, who noticed the way light hit the buildings at dusk, who laughed without reservation. With her, life wasn't a muted documentary anymore. It was vivid, technicolor, full of possibility. 6 months later, on the anniversary of that gallery night, we returned to the same spot. Echoes had sold, but the artist had a new piece up. 2 figures walking under a yellow umbrella, silhouettes against the city glow. Elena squeezed my hand. I told the artist about us, she whispered. I pulled her close, the scent of her shampoo jasmine and rain filling my senses. You changed everything, Elena, that night. It was the beginning. She looked up at me, hazel eyes shining. We changed it together. Years have passed since then. We got married in a small ceremony by the lake, surrounded by friends and the kind of love that grows deeper with time. I left the accounting firm to pursue writing full-time, publishing my first novel last year, a story inspired by a rainy night and a girl with a yellow umbrella. Elena's photographs now grace gallery walls and magazine covers, each one a testament to seeing the extraordinary in the everyday dot sometimes, on quiet evenings. I watch her edit photos at our kitchen table, the crescent moon pendant still around her neck. I think back to that lonely man walking through the rain, and I'm grateful. One night, one conversation, one person, it can rewrite the script of your life. If you're out there feeling stuck, like the world is passing you by, keep walking. You never know when you'll meet the girl or the person who changes everything. For me, it happened under the lights of a Chicago gallery. The night I met the girl who changed my life continued. The funny thing about life is that the moments that change everything rarely announce themselves. They don't arrive with fireworks or dramatic music. Most of the time, they slip quietly into your story, disguised as an ordinary evening. For me, it was a rainy night, a cozy rainy night, yellow umbrella, and a woman who taught me how to see the world again. A few years after our wedding, Elena and I settled into a comfortable rhythm. We bought a small brick house on a tree-lined street just outside downtown Chicago. It wasn't extravagant, but it was ours. The front porch creaked when you stepped on it. The kitchen was too small, and the old radiator made strange noises every winter. Yet every corner of that house held memories. One Saturday morning, I woke to find Elena standing by the window with her camera. Golden sunlight poured through the glass, illuminating dust particles floating in the air. "What are you photographing?" I asked sleepily. She smiled without turning around. "The light?" I laughed. "Just the light?" She finally looked at me. "Nothing is ever just the light." That was Elena. She had a way of finding meaning in things everyone else ignored. While I looked at a crowded street and saw traffic, she saw stories. While I looked at an old building and saw bricks, she saw history. While I looked at myself and saw flaws, she saw possibilities. Over the years, her perspective slowly changed me. I began carrying a small notebook everywhere. Whenever an interesting conversation happened or an idea struck me, I'd write it down. Those notes eventually became chapters. Those chapters became books. My first novel sold modestly. My second sold better. By the time I published my third, I was invited to literary festivals and book signings across the country. The success felt surreal. One evening after a reading in New York, a young man approached me with a worn copy of my first novel. His hands trembled slightly. "I just wanted to thank you," he said. "For what?" He swallowed hard. "I was going through a difficult time. Your book reminded me that people can start over." For a moment, I couldn't speak, because years earlier, Elena had done the same thing for me. Stories have a strange way of traveling. One person's hope becomes another person's lifeline. When I got back to the hotel that night, I called Elena immediately. She answered on the second ring. "How was the event?" she asked. I smiled. "Someone told me my book changed his life." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, "See, I told you not to hide your gift, even after all those years." Hearing her say she believed in me made me feel invincible. That life isn't only made of beautiful moments. There are chapters nobody wants to write. The hardest one came unexpectedly. It was late autumn when Elena's father became seriously ill. He still lived in Michigan, in the small town where she'd grown up. The diagnosis arrived like a storm. Suddenly, our weekends became long drives across state lines. Hospital visits replaced gallery openings. Phone calls from doctors interrupted dinners. For the first time since I'd known her, Elena seemed lost. The woman who always found beauty in the world struggled to find it herself. One night, after returning from the hospital, I found her sitting alone on the porch. She stared into the darkness. I sat beside her. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, she whispered, "I'm scared." Those two words nearly broke my heart. Because she had spent years being my strength, now she needed mine. I wrapped an arm around her. "Shoulders, we'll get through this." She leaned her head against me. "What if we don't?" I looked up at the stars. Then I remembered something she told me years ago under a Chicago street lamp. "Fear is just the echo of a life, you know my VED. So I repeated her own words back to her. For the first time in weeks, she smiled, a small smile, but it was enough. The following months were difficult. There were setbacks and tears and moments of exhaustion. Yet there were also moments of incredible love. Family members reunited. Old stories were shared. Forgiveness was offered where it had long been overdue, and through it all, Elena never stopped taking photographs. Not for magazines. Not for galleries. For herself. She photographed her father's hands holding a coffee mug, his favorite chair by the fireplace, the family dog sleeping at his feet. Ordinary moments. Moments that suddenly felt precious. One evening, her father asked to see the photos. Elena sat beside his bed and showed him every image. He smiled at each one. When she finished, he looked at her with tears in his eyes. "You captured my life." That photograph album became one of Elena's most treasured possessions. Years later, she still keeps it on a shelf in her living room. Whenever she opens it, she remembers not just loss, but love. Life moved forward. As it always does. The seasons changed. Books were written. Photographs were taken. Dreams evolved. Then came another unexpected surprise. Our daughter, Sophie. When the nurse placed her in my arms for the first time, I felt a kind of love I didn't know existed. Tiny fingers, tiny heartbeat. Tiny human. Yet somehow she instantly became the center of our universe. Elena cried. I cried. Even the nurse looked emotional. The years that followed were beautifully chaotic. Sleep became a luxury. The house filled with toys. The walls accumulated crayon masterpieces. Saturday mornings transformed into pancake-making competitions. Every milestone felt magical. First steps, first words, First day of school, one afternoon. When Sophie was 7 years old, she came home carrying a drawing. She handed it to us proudly. It showed three stick figures standing beneath a bright yellow umbrella. "That's us," she explained. I stared at the picture. Then I looked at Elena. She was already smiling. Neither of us needed to say anything. That yellow umbrella had become part of our family story. A symbol of chance. Of connection. Of a single night that changed everything. Now. As I write these words, I sit at the same kitchen table where so many memories were made. Across from me, Elena edits photographs on her laptop. Few gray strands have appeared in her hair. The years have softened us both, but when she looks up and smiles, I still see the woman from the gallery. The woman who stood beside a painting called Echoes and changed the direction of my life. Sometimes people ask me the secret to happiness. They expect a profound answer. Something philosophical. Something complicated. But the truth is simpler than that. Happiness isn't a destination. It's a collection of moments, a conversation with a stranger, a shared umbrella in the rain. Coffee at midnight, a bit. Hand to hold during difficult times. A person who reminds you who you are when you've forgotten. If I could speak to the lonely man I used to be, the one walking through downtown Chicago all those years ago, I'd tell him this: keep going, keep believing, keep your heart open, because somewhere ahead, a moment is waiting. A person is waiting, a story is waiting, and when it arrives, it may not look extraordinary at first. It might look like a rainy night, a crowded gallery. A yellow umbrella. But sometimes the smallest moments become the biggest chapters of your life. I know because that's exactly what happened to me. And every day since, I've been grateful for the night I met the girl who changed my life. The night I met the girl who changed my life. Final chapter. The older I get, the more I understand something Elena has always known. Life isn't measured by years. It's measured by moments. The years passed more quickly than either of us expected. One day, Sophie was a little girl drawing stick figures beneath yellow umbrellas. The next, she was a teenager borrowing the car and rolling her eyes whenever I offered fatherly advice. Then, suddenly, she was preparing for college. The night before she left, Elena and I sat together on the back porch. The house was quiet, too quiet. Inside, boxes were stacked near the front door, filled with everything Sophie insisted she needed for her dorm room. Elena leaned against my shoulder. "I don't think I'm ready." I laughed softly. "You've been saying that since she started kindergarten?" Because I wasn't ready then either. The porch light cast a gentle glow across the yard. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Elena reached for my hand. "Do you remember the diner?" I smiled immediately. "The one after the gallery?" She nodded. "The one with terrible coffee and greasy fries." The coffee was awful, and the fries were perfect. We both laughed. Even after all those years, we could still return to that night as if it had happened yesterday. The beginning of our story remained one of our favorite places to visit. The next morning, we helped Sophie load the car. There were hugs. There were tears, mostly Elena's. Then Sophie climbed into the driver's seat. Before leaving, she rolled down the window. "Mom?" "Yes." "Dad?" "Yeah." She smiled. "Thanks for showing me what love looks like." Then she drove away. Neither Elena nor I moved until the car disappeared around the corner. When it was gone, Elena wiped away a tear. I squeezed her hand, and for the first time in nearly 20 years, it was just the two of us again. The empty nest felt strange at first. The house seemed larger. Quieter. But slowly, we adapted. We rediscovered the parts of ourselves that had existed before parenthood. Weekend road trips returned. Late night conversations stretched past midnight. We visited little towns we'd never seen before. Elena photographed them. I wrote about them. Sometimes we'd stop at roadside diners simply because they looked Interesting that sometimes we'd get lost on purpose. Those became some of our happiest years. One autumn afternoon, we found ourselves back in the West Loop. The neighborhood had changed. New buildings stood where old warehouses once existed. Restaurants had replaced many of the galleries. Yet somehow the area still felt familiar. We wandered through the streets hand in hand. Then Elena suddenly stopped walking. Look, across the street stood the building where we'd first met. The gallery had become a bookstore for a moment. Neither of us said anything. We simply stared. 20-5 years. An entire lifetime. All because one person had spoken 3 simple words. Beautiful, isn't it? Elena looked at me. Wanna go inside? I nodded. The bookstore smelled like paper and coffee. Books lined every wall. Customers browsed quietly between shelves. Near the entrance stood a display table featuring local authors. To my surprise, several of my novels were there. Elena laughed. Look at that. I felt embarrassed. But secretly, I was proud. Not because my books were being sold, because years earlier, I'd almost never written them. A young employee approached. She couldn't have been older than 20. Her eyes widened. Oh my God. I immediately knew what was happening. She recognized me. I love your books, she said. Thank you. Then she looked at Elena. And your photography? Elena smiled. The young woman shook her head. You two are kind of legendary around here. We exchanged amused glances. Legendary. That seemed impossible. The employee pointed toward a framed photograph hanging on the wall. We walked over. The image stopped us both in our tracks. It was one of Elena's. A black and white photograph taken years earlier. It showed 2 people walking beneath a yellow umbrella through the rain. Us exactly. Just silhouettes, but it felt like us. Beneath the frame was a small plaque. It read, "Every great story begins with a single moment." Elena reached for my hand. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. That photograph said everything. Few years later, retirement began creeping into our conversations, not because we wanted to stop creating. We simply wanted more time together, more mornings drinking coffee on the porch. More afternoons by the lake, more sunsets. One summer evening, we drove to Lake Michigan. The water shimmered beneath the fading sunlight. We brought a blanket and sat near the shore. The waves rolled in gently. The sky blazed with shades of orange, pink, and gold. Elena rested her head against my shoulder. Do you ever think about fate? I considered the question, sometimes. Do you think we were supposed to meet? I looked at her. The woman who had become my best friend. My partner. My greatest adventure. Then I looked out across the lake. I don't know. She laughed. Very philosophical. I smiled. But I do know this. What? If I lived 1,000 lives, I'd spend every one of them hoping to find you again. For a moment she didn't speak. Then tears filled her eyes. Happy tears. The kind that come from loving and being loved. The kind worth everything. Years continued their steady march forward. Hair turned gray. Faces changed. The world changed, but some things never did. The yellow umbrella still sat near our front door. Old and faded now, the fabric slightly worn, the handle scratched. Yet neither of us could throw it away. It had become more than an umbrella. It was proof that ordinary objects can carry extraordinary memories. One winter evening, long after the sun had disappeared, a snowstorm swept through the city. The power went out. The house fell silent. Elena and I lit candles and sat together in the living room. The fire crackled softly. Outside, snow drifted past the windows. For a while, we simply enjoyed the quiet. Then Elena leaned closer. Alex? Yeah. If you could relive one day, which would it be? I didn't hesitate. The gallery. She smiled. Me too. The firelight danced across her face, and suddenly, I could see every version of her at once. The young woman beneath the gallery lights. the photographer chasing. Stories. The bride by the lake. The mother holding our daughter. The partner who stood beside me through every triumph and heartbreak. The love of my life. Eventually, she fell asleep with her head on my shoulder. I stayed awake a little longer, watching the snow, listening to the fire, feeling grateful. Not because life had been perfect. It hadn't. We'd experienced loss. Disappointment. Fear. Heartbreak. Addy. Life contains those things. What made ours special wasn't the absence of hardship. It was the presence of love. A love that showed up every day. A love that stayed. A love that transformed ordinary moments into treasured memories. As midnight approached, I gently kissed Elena's forehead. She stirred slightly but didn't wake. I smiled. Then I looked around our home. The photographs, the books. The memories, the life we built together. And I thought back to the lonely man walking through the rain all those years ago. He had no idea what waited ahead. No idea that one conversation would change everything. No idea that a stranger would become family. No idea that a single night would become an entire lifetime. But that's the beauty of life. The next chapter is always unwritten. The next miracle is always possible. The next person who changes your world may be only one conversation away. And sometimes, if you're lucky, that conversation lasts forever. The end. Like, subscribe, and comment CTA. Enjoyed this story? Like this video if it touched your heart. Comment below. Do you believe one person can completely change your life? Subscribe for more emotional love stories, heartwarming romances, and unforgettable storytelling every week. Your support helps us bring more beautiful stories to life. Thank you for watching Romantic Nights Official.